The single mom put back baby formula she couldn't afford and walked away without begging. What she didn't know, the vampire king watching from the shadows had spent 3 centuries alone, and her quiet dignity reminded him what it meant to be human. He hasn't stopped protecting her since. Soren hadn't entered a human grocery store in 43 years. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, harsh and unnatural against his ancient eyes. He'd come here hunting, following the scent of a drug dealer who'd been preying on college students near the university. Easy prey, guilty prey, the kind that let him sleep during the day without dreams of the innocent. But now he stood frozen in the infant care aisle, watching something that made his cold blood stir. A young woman with dark circles under her eyes was staring at a can of baby formula. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, then pulled back. Reached again. Pulled back. In her other arm, a baby slept against her chest in a worn fabric wrap, tiny fingers curled into her jacket. The child couldn't have been more than 3 months old. Soren moved closer, silent as shadow. Centuries of predatory instinct made him invisible to human awareness when he wished to be. He could hear her heartbeat, rapid, anxious. Could smell the salt of tears she refused to shed. The woman picked up the formula can and held it like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She turned it over, checking the price tag. Then she opened her wallet. Empty. Soren watched her count the coins in the small change pocket. 67 cents. The formula cost $18. This was the moment people usually broke. He'd seen it before, across centuries and continents. This was when they begged. When they approached strangers with trembling voices and practiced speeches. When they justified and explained and pleaded. The woman did none of these things. She placed the formula back on the shelf with careful precision, making sure it lined up perfectly with the others. Then she pressed her lips to her baby's forehead, a kiss so tender it seemed to hold every ounce of love in the world, and walked away.
No tears.
No scene. No desperation in her movements. Just quiet dignity that didn't ask the world for anything. Soren found himself following her through the store, keeping his distance. She passed the deli counter where free samples were being offered. She didn't take any, though her stomach growled loud enough for his supernatural hearing to catch. She walked past the bulletin board near the exit where people posted requests for help, job offers, community resources. She didn't stop. At the automatic doors, she paused only to adjust the baby wrap, making sure her child was warm. Then she stepped out into the November night. Soren stood in the fluorescent brightness, feeling something he hadn't experienced in over 200 years. Confusion. He was a king. He'd ruled vampire covens across 3 continents. He'd seen empires rise and fall, watched humans in their best moments and their worst. He'd witnessed such acts of love and such depths of cruelty that he'd thought nothing could surprise him anymore. But this woman had surprised him. She had nothing, and she'd asked for nothing. In an age where people demanded everything, attention, validation, assistance, she had simply walked away. The predator in him whispered that she was vulnerable.
Easy.
Alone in the dark with an infant. But something deeper, something he'd buried long ago, stirred with a different recognition. Respect. Soren left the store, his original prey forgotten. The drug dealer could wait. He had questions now, and questions were far more interesting than hunger. The woman walked 3 blocks to a bus stop, swaying gently to keep the baby sleeping. She checked her phone, cracked screen, old model, and her shoulders sagged when she saw the time. She'd missed the last bus. It would be a 40-minute walk home, maybe more with an infant. She started walking. Soren followed from the rooftops, moving like smoke across the skyline. This was what he was good at, watching, analyzing, understanding prey. Except she wasn't prey, was she? She was something else. Something that nagged at the edges of his memory, like a melody he'd once known. The neighborhood deteriorated as they moved west. Broken streetlights. Graffiti. The kind of area where people locked their doors and minded their business. The woman walked with her head up, aware but not afraid. She'd done this route before. She stopped at a corner store, smaller, cheaper than the grocery. Through the window, Soren watched her count out her 67 cents and buy a single banana. The cashier, an elderly man, tried to give her a bag of day-old bread for free. She refused it with a polite shake of her head. "I only pay for what I can afford," she said softly. "Someone else needs that more than me." The cashier stared after her as she left, the same confusion on his face that Soren felt in his chest. Who was this woman? She lived in a building that should have been condemned. 4th floor, no elevator. Soren watched from across the street as lights flickered on in a tiny apartment. Through the window, he could see her lay the baby in a crib that looked handmade from repurposed wood. She ate half the banana while standing at the sink, staring at nothing. Then she wrapped the other half carefully and put it in an ancient refrigerator. Tomorrow's breakfast, he realized. The baby woke crying. The woman picked her up, Soren could hear the soft words now. "Shoo, Maya, Mama's here," and tried to nurse. But her body was failing. Malnutrition had caught up with her milk supply. She rocked Maya anyway, humming a lullaby that sounded Eastern European. Romanian? Bulgarian? Soren's memory flickered with recognition but refused to form a complete picture. Eventually, Maya fell back asleep from exhaustion rather than satisfaction. The woman stood at the window then, looking out at the city with eyes that held no self-pity, just determination. And exhaustion so deep it had carved shadows into her young face. Soren realized with a start that she couldn't be older than 25. She looked 40. As he watched, the woman pulled out a notebook and began writing, carefully tracking something. Numbers. Schedules. She was planning, organizing, fighting with the only weapons she had, discipline and refusal to surrender. The predator in Soren had seen thousands of humans in survival mode. They all looked the same eventually, desperate, willing to compromise anything for one more day. But this woman's eyes held something different. "I will survive," they said. "But not by becoming less than I am." Soren left the rooftop as dawn approached, his mind churning with questions. He retreated to his penthouse across the city, all dark wood and darker windows, the kind of wealth that humans couldn't imagine. He should forget her. She was human, temporary, irrelevant to a creature who'd already lived 3 centuries. But as he settled into the darkness to wait out the sun, one thought circled his ancient mind. When was the last time a human surprised me? And deeper, more troubling. Why does she feel familiar? The drug dealer's blood tasted like chemicals and regret. Soren fed quickly in the alley behind a nightclub, draining just enough to sustain himself for another week. The man had been selling fentanyl-laced pills to teenagers.
No guilt. No remorse.
The kind of human that made feeding easy. But tonight, even guilty blood couldn't quiet his thoughts. She kissed the baby's forehead before putting the formula back. Soren released the dealer, who would wake in a few hours with no memory and a sudden, inexplicable urge to turn himself into the police. It was a trick Soren had perfected over the decades, compulsion that lasted just long enough to matter. He should have felt satisfied. Federal purposeful. Instead, he felt distracted. The woman's face kept interrupting his thoughts. Not her beauty, though she would have been striking if exhaustion hadn't hollowed her features. No, it was her expression. That quiet dignity. The way she'd refused charity from the cashier, with the same grace some people refused insults. "Someone else needs that more than me." Who said that when they were starving? Soren moved through the city's shadows, his centuries-old instincts carrying him across rooftops without conscious thought. He'd ruled vampire courts with absolute authority. He'd negotiated treaties with werewolf packs and witch covens. He'd accumulated wealth that could fund small nations. And he was thinking about baby formula. He stopped on a rooftop overlooking the financial district, the city sprawling beneath him like a circuit board of light and darkness. Somewhere in that grid, the woman, he'd heard the cashier call her something, Lena, was probably awake. Probably working. He'd noticed the calluses on her hands, the stains on her jacket that suggested kitchen work. Why do I care? The question annoyed him more than the lack of an answer. Soren closed his eyes, trying to center himself the way his sire had taught him 200 years ago.
Clear the mind.
Focus on the present. The past is dead, and we are beyond death. But the past wasn't cooperating tonight. A memory surfaced, unbidden and fragmentary.
Then,
Cold autumn rain like tonight. He'd been injured, a rare thing for a vampire, but hunters had gotten lucky with a blessed blade. He'd stumbled into an alley, his supernatural healing slowed by the holy water they'd coated the weapon with. A woman had found him, young, dark hair plastered to her face by rain. She should have run. Instead, she'd pressed her scarf to his wound. "Hold this," she'd said in accented English. "Pressure stops bleeding." He tried to compel her to leave, to forget, but the holy water in his system had weakened him. She hadn't left anyway. "You're in shock," she told him, like he was just another human who needed help. "Stay awake."
talk to me.
"What's your name?" He'd been too weak to answer. Too weak to feed, to defend, to do anything but accept help from this stranger who smelled like coffee and kindness. She'd stayed until his healing finally kicked in.
Until he could stand.
And then, the memory fragmented, slipping away like smoke through his fingers. Soren's eyes snapped open, his dead heart hammering with something like panic. When had that happened? 5 years ago? 10? Time blurred when you lived forever. But that memory felt recent. And important. Why couldn't he remember her face clearly? Why couldn't he remember what happened after she'd helped him? He'd compelled her. He must have. He always did, erasing himself from human memory to stay safe. But compulsion should have erased her from his memory too, shouldn't it?
No.
He would remember helping her. Remember saving her in return, the way he always did when a human showed unexpected compassion. Except he didn't remember that part at all. The void where that memory should be felt wrong. Intentional. Had someone made him forget? Soren stood abruptly, his coat snapping in the wind. Power radiated from him unconsciously, sending pigeons scattering and making the air itself feel heavier. A vampire king's presence, barely contained. Someone had tampered with his memory. Someone powerful enough to make him forget a human he'd wanted to remember. The question was why. And the deeper question, the one that made his ancient instincts scream warning, was whether the woman from the grocery store was the same woman from the alley. He pulled out his phone, a concession to modernity he'd grudgingly accepted. Within minutes, he'd accessed city databases that should have been secure. Lena Petrov, 24 years old. Work history at 3 different restaurants. No father listed on the baby's birth certificate. And there, buried in medical records he had no legal right to access, a hospital visit from 7 years ago. Injury to right wrist from broken glass while rendering aid to an unidentified person in an alley. 7 years ago. Soren looked at his own wrist, at the faint scar that should have faded completely, but never quite had. A blessed blade left marks even vampires couldn't entirely erase. She saved my life, and I made myself forget her. The realization hit him like dawn. Someone had wanted him to forget the human who'd shown him compassion. Someone had wanted that connection severed, which meant someone had been watching him even then. Planning. Protecting themselves. Or protecting her. From me. The thought should have amused him. He was a king, not a monster. He had control. But as he remembered the taste of the dealer's blood, the ease with which he'd taken it, he wondered. What had he been like 7 years ago? Before he'd grown tired? Before loneliness had carved something hollow in his chest? What did I do that made someone erase her from my memory? Soren looked toward the west side of the city, where a young mother slept, or didn't sleep, in a condemned building. She'd saved him once, and he'd forgotten her. The debt, he realized, was older and deeper than he'd thought. Lena woke to Maya's crying at 4:47 a.m. 3 hours of sleep. Better than yesterday's, too. She stumbled to the crib, her body moving on autopilot. Maya's face was red with hunger and frustration, tiny fists waving at the injustice of an empty stomach. Lena tried to nurse again, but her body had nothing left to give. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered, rocking Maya against her chest. I'm so sorry. She boiled water for the last packet of oatmeal in her cupboard, let it cool, and fed Maya tiny spoonfuls. It wasn't enough. It wasn't right. But it kept her daughter alive for another day. That was all Lena could promise anymore. One more day. She had a shift at the diner starting at 6. Then 3 hours at the dry cleaners. If she was lucky, she'd be home by 4 p.m., sleep until Maya woke her, then start over tomorrow. This was survival. It wasn't pretty, but it was hers. She wasn't stealing, wasn't begging, wasn't compromising the promises she'd made to herself when she'd held Maya for the first time. I will show you dignity. I will teach you that pride isn't about what you have. It's about who you refuse to become. At 5:30 a.m., Lena bundled Maya into the fabric wrap and opened her apartment door. She nearly tripped over the boxes. 4 of them, stacked neatly in the hallway.
Blank cardboard, no máquinas.
No note. No name. Lena's heart hammered as she looked left, then right down the corridor. The hallway was empty. Mrs. Chen's door, at the far end, remained closed. The Rodriguez family upstairs wouldn't be awake for another hour. She nudged the top box with her foot. It shifted, heavy, but not impossibly so. Wrong apartment. Has to be. But there were only 6 units on this floor, and hers was the only one with a baby. These boxes were clearly intended for someone with an infant. Lena knelt carefully, keeping Maya secure against her chest, and opened the top box. Baby formula. 6 cans. The expensive kind, the one the pediatrician had recommended. The one Lena had held in the grocery store last night, before putting it back. Her breath caught. She tore open the second box. Diapers.
Size 1.
The exact size Maya needed. The third box, groceries. Real food. Rice, beans, pasta, canned vegetables, protein powder, vitamin supplements. The fourth box, baby clothes, warm and new, with tags still attached. Lena sat back on her heels, staring at hundreds of dollars worth of supplies that had appeared like magic outside her door. Maya cooed against her chest, oblivious to the earthquake happening in her mother's mind. This is a mistake. It had to be. People didn't just leave anonymous gifts. There were always strings. Always expectations. Always a price that came due when you least expected it. Lena had learned that lesson the hard way. She stood up, grabbed the nearest box, the diapers, and dragged it back inside her apartment. Then the formula. Then the groceries. The clothes. Not because she was accepting them. Because she couldn't leave them in the hallway where someone else might take them before she figured out what to do. Inside her apartment, Lena stared at the boxes like they were evidence at a crime scene.
Think.
Who would do this? Mrs. Chun was on a fixed income. The Rodriguez family had 3 kids of their own. Her boss at the diner barely paid minimum wage. The dry cleaner's owner hadn't given her a raise in 2 years. No one in her life had this kind of money to spare, which meant this came from someone who didn't know her. Some charity organization that had gotten her address from. Where? The hospital? The welfare office she'd visited once before deciding she'd rather starve than fill out their forms.
No.
I went to that office and walked out. I didn't give them anything to follow up on. A darker thought crept in. What if someone's watching me? Lena moved to the window, Maya still against her chest, and looked down at the street. Early morning light was just starting to gray the sky. A few cars passed. A man walked a dog. Everything looked normal. But normal didn't leave hundreds of dollars of supplies at your door. She checked her phone. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. Maya started fussing again, and Lena made a decision. She wouldn't use any of it. Not until she knew where it came from. She grabbed her work bag, checked that she had enough formula packets at the diner's break room, the single-serve samples the delivery truck driver sometimes gave her out of pity, and headed out. The boxes could wait. But at the door, she paused. Looked back at the can of formula sitting on top of the pile. Maya needs it. But I can't accept what I didn't earn. It was the same argument she'd had with herself 1,000 times. Pride versus practicality. Dignity versus survival. She'd always chosen dignity before. But before, she'd been choosing for herself. Now, she was choosing for Maya too. Lena closed the door with the boxes still inside, locked it, and headed to work. She'd made her decision. If she couldn't figure out where the supplies came from by tonight, she'd leave them in the building lobby with a note. Some other mother would need them more. Someone who didn't have Lena's burden of needing to know that everything in her daughter's life was earned honestly, without debt, without obligation to strangers who might want something in return. Even if that burden was slowly killing her. As she walked down the 4 flights of stairs, Lena didn't notice the shadow on the rooftop across the street. Didn't notice the figure watching her leave. Didn't notice the way that figure's hands clenched when she walked past the boxes without taking anything with her. Soren had expected gratitude. He'd gotten refusal. And somehow, that made everything more complicated. Soren didn't leave the rooftop. He told himself he was being strategic, observing, making sure the supplies were properly secured, that no one stole them from her hallway. The truth was simpler and more disturbing. He couldn't look away. Below, the city woke in layers. Early shift workers trudging to bus stops. Delivery trucks rumbling through empty streets. The sky bleeding from black to gray to the pale blue that hurt his eyes. He should retreat. Find darkness. Sleep through the day like every vampire with sense. Instead, Soren pulled his coat tighter and watched Lena's building. At 7:15 a.m., a neighbor, Mrs. Chun, he'd learned from listening to hallway conversations, shuffled out for her morning walk. She paused at Lena's door, noticed the boxes, and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, then continued down the stairs, shaking her head. At 9:33 a.m., the landlord came by to fix a leak 2 floors down. He saw the boxes, checked the apartment number, and kept walking. At 2:47 p.m., 2 teenagers from the building approached the boxes with interest. They were reaching for the top one when Mrs. Chen appeared from nowhere, rapid-fire Cantonese, sending them scattering. She stood guard after that. Just sat on the stairs with her thermos of tea, keeping watch like a dragon guarding treasure she didn't claim as her own. Even the neighbors respect her pride, Soren realized. He'd seen humans help each other before. It was common enough. Charity, kindness, the social bonds that kept communities functioning. But this was different. Mrs. Chen wasn't protecting donations for a grateful recipient. She was protecting Lena's right to refuse them. That was something Soren had never seen. At 4:12 p.m., Lena returned. She looked worse than she had that morning. There was a grease stain on her jacket, and she was limping slightly. Maya slept against her chest, tiny face peaceful despite her mother's exhaustion. Soren watched Lena climb the 4 flights of stairs. Watched her pause at her door, looking at the boxes that hadn't moved. Watched her shoulders tense with what looked like resolve. She opened her apartment, dragged all 4 boxes inside, and closed the door. For a moment, Soren felt something like victory. Then, 30 minutes later, she emerged carrying 2 of the boxes. She took them downstairs to the building's small lobby and set them near the entrance with a folded piece of paper on top. Soren's supernatural vision let him read it from across the street. To whoever left these, thank you, but I can't accept what I didn't earn. Someone else needs this more. Please donate to the family shelter on Baker Street. She'd kept the formula and diapers, the immediate necessities for Maya. Everything else she'd refused. Soren felt an unfamiliar emotion rising in his chest. Not anger, exactly. Something sharper. More personal. Frustration. He'd ruled vampire covens through force of will and ancient authority. He'd negotiated with supernatural beings who'd lived even longer than him. He'd accumulated power and wealth beyond human comprehension. And he couldn't figure out how to help one stubborn human accept basic necessities. The sun was setting now, the sky turning orange and purple. Soren's strength returned as darkness fell, his senses sharpening. He could hear Lena moving around her apartment. Could hear her trying to soothe Maya, who was crying again.
Hungry again.
She opened a can of formula, one from his boxes, and prepared a bottle with careful precision. She fed Maya slowly, whispering to her in a language Soren now recognized as Romanian. We take only what we must, Iubirea mea. Only what we must. Our dignity is all we have. Do you understand? Our dignity is everything. The words stirred something in Soren's ancient memory. Not the compelled forgetting from 7 years ago, something older. Something from his human life. His mother had said something similar once. Before the revolution. Before the starvation. Before everything fell apart and a desperate young man had accepted a vampire's offer of immortality rather than watch his family waste away. We are not animals. We do not beg. His mother had died 2 weeks later, refusing to eat the food he'd stolen. She died proud and starving, just like Lena was doing now. The memory burned through him like holy water. He'd spent 3 centuries trying to forget his human life, the weakness and mortality of it. But watching Lena choose pride over survival, he remembered exactly what it felt like to be helpless. To be human. To watch someone you cared about suffer because they refused to compromise who they were. I couldn't save my mother. She wouldn't let me. But Lena isn't my mother. She's the woman who saved my life when I was bleeding in an alley. She's a debt I forgot I owed. Soren pulled out his phone and made a call. It was answered on the first ring. Marcus. I need you to create a paper trail. What kind of paper trail? His business manager sounded cautious. Soren didn't usually call about paperwork. Employment records. Make it look like Lena Petrov won a small business grant. Something she applied for months ago and forgot about. $5,000. Legitimate. Traceable. Something she earned. Silence on the other end. You're helping a human. I'm paying a debt. Since when do you care about debts to humans? Since I remembered I was human once. Since I remembered what it cost. Just do it, Marcus. He hung up and watched Lena's apartment. She'd managed to get Maya to sleep and was now sitting at her small table with her notebook, calculating something. Probably how to stretch the formula he'd given her. How long the diapers would last. How to survive another week. She worked multiple jobs, he'd learned from following her. The diner from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. The dry cleaners from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And 3 nights a week, she cleaned office buildings from midnight to 4 a.m., carrying Maya with her because she couldn't afford childcare. This wasn't temporary hardship. This was systematic exhaustion. The kind that killed people slowly, wearing them down until their bodies simply gave up. Soren made his decision then. He wouldn't just help her once. He would watch. Protect. Ensure she survived long enough to accept help that came with dignity attached. She'd saved his life 7 years ago. The least he could do was make sure she lived long enough to see her daughter grow. Even if she never knew who was watching over her. The diner smelled like grease, coffee, and broken dreams. Soren walked in at 7:43 a.m., wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, enough to dim his unnatural beauty, but not enough to look suspicious. The morning sun filtering through the windows made his skin prickle uncomfortably, but he'd fed well last night. He could endure it. He took a booth near the back and waited. Lena appeared 2 minutes later, carrying a coffee pot and wearing an apron that had seen better decades. She moved efficiently between tables, refilling cups without being asked, clearing plates with practiced ease. Her smile for customers was polite but tired. She hadn't slept. Soren could see it in the shadows under her eyes, hear it in the slight catch of her breath when she bent down. Coffee. She was at his table before he'd fully registered her approach. Up close, the exhaustion was even more pronounced. But there was something else too, a quiet strength in the way she held herself. Like she was carrying the world but refused to let it break her posture. Please, Soren kept his voice neutral. And the breakfast special. She poured his coffee without meeting his eyes, her movements automatic. Eggs. Scrambled. She started to turn away, and that's when Soren saw it. Her right wrist, exposed as she shifted the coffee pot to her other hand. A scar. Thin. White. Running 3 inches along the inside of her wrist. Old enough to have faded, but deep enough to have left a permanent mark. The world seemed to slow down. Soren's own wrist, the one a blessed blade had opened 7 years ago, burned with phantom pain. He remembered now, with crystalline clarity, the woman in the rain pressing fabric to his wound. Pressure stops bleeding. She'd used her scarf. The glass from the broken bottle he'd fallen on had cut her wrist when she'd helped him. She hadn't even flinched. Stay awake. Talk to me. It was her. The memory he'd been robbed of, standing right in front of him with a coffee pot and a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sir? Lena's voice broke through his paralysis. Are you all right? Soren realized he'd been staring. He forced himself to look away, to act human.
Fine. Sorry.
Didn't sleep well. Something flickered across her face. Understanding, maybe. She knew what exhaustion looked like. I know the feeling, she said softly, then headed back to the kitchen. Soren sat frozen in the booth, his mind racing through implications. She didn't recognize him. Of course she didn't. He'd compelled her that night, made her forget his face even if he couldn't erase the memory of helping him. And 7 years was a long time for a human. He looked different in daylight, dressed differently, acted differently. But he recognized her now. Completely. The memory returned in full force, no longer fragmented. She'd stayed with him for 20 minutes in that alley, in the freezing rain, talking to keep him conscious. She'd told him about her grandmother in Romania, about learning to cook traditional food, about wanting to open her own restaurant someday. She'd been 17, working 2 jobs to save money for culinary school. When his healing had finally kicked in, when he'd been strong enough to stand and compel her, he'd looked into her dark eyes and seen something he'd rarely encountered. Genuine compassion with no expectation of reward. He'd made her forget his face, forget the danger, but he'd left her with a memory of helping someone who'd needed it. Because that memory, he'd thought, would matter to someone like her. Then he'd called Marcus and told him to set up a culinary school scholarship in her name. Legitimate. Something she'd earned through an essay contest she didn't remember entering. The scholarship that never reached her. Soren pulled out his phone under the table and texted Marcus. Lena Petrov. Did we fund her culinary scholarship 7 years ago? The response came quickly. Checking.
Yes.
Scholarship issued but never claimed. Sent to her address. No response. Find out why. Lena returned with his breakfast, setting down a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and bacon. Her movements were practiced, efficient. She was good at this job, despite clearly being overqualified for it. Anything else? She asked. What happened to culinary school? The question was out before Soren could stop it. Lena froze. Her eyes met his for the first time, really met them, and he saw the flash of surprise. And something deeper, grief. How did you? She stopped herself. I don't know you.
I'm sorry.
That was inappropriate, Soren backpedaled, trying to sound like a curious customer rather than someone who'd researched her entire life. You move like someone who's trained. Professional training, not just waitressing experience. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, but wariness remained in her eyes. I was going to go, she said quietly. 7 years ago. I even got a scholarship somehow. But then my grandmother got sick. Came from Romania to live with me. The scholarship couldn't be deferred, and I couldn't leave her alone. What happened?
Cancer.
She lasted 8 months. Lena's voice was steady, but her knuckles whitened around the coffee pot. By the time she passed, the scholarship was gone.
And she paused.
I met someone. Got pregnant.
He left.
Life happened. She gave up culinary school for her grandmother. Then lost everything else anyway. I'm sorry, Soren said, and meant it. Lena shrugged, a gesture that tried to be casual but carried the weight of every abandoned dream. We don't always get what we want, but we get what we can handle, right? No, Soren thought, watching her walk away to take another table's order. You get what life throws at you, and you survive it with more grace than anyone has a right to expect. She'd saved his life 7 years ago. He'd tried to help her in return. And fate had stolen that help away, leaving her to struggle alone while raising a child and working herself to death in a diner that didn't deserve her. The debt he owed wasn't just about one night in an alley anymore. It was about 7 years of stolen opportunities. 7 years of a promise he'd made and failed to keep. Soren ate his breakfast slowly, watching Lena move between tables with quiet dignity. She smiled at a regular customer, slipped an extra pancake onto a homeless man's plate when her manager wasn't looking, moved through her shift like someone who'd learned to find meaning in small acts of service. She'd kept her compassion despite everything life had taken from her. That, more than anything, convinced Soren that helping her wasn't just about paying a debt. It was about making sure the world didn't destroy one of the few genuinely good people left in it. Even if she'd never accept help willingly, he'd just have to get more creative about how he offered it. The boxes reappeared 3 days later. Lena found them outside her door after her night shift at the office building, 4:47 a.m. Maya asleep in the wrap against her chest, her arms aching from pushing industrial vacuum for 4 hours. Different boxes this time. Smaller. More personal. She stared at them with a sinking feeling in her stomach. This wasn't random charity anymore. Someone was deliberately helping her. Someone who knew her schedule, knew when she'd be out, knew exactly what she needed. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like surveillance. Lena dragged the boxes inside, exhaustion making her movements clumsy. She didn't want to open them. Didn't want to see what other necessities some anonymous benefactor had decided she deserved. But curiosity won. Box 1. Groceries again. But not random supplies this time. Ingredients for Romanian sarmale, her grandmother's recipe. Cabbage leaves, ground meat, rice, tomato sauce, dill. Things she hadn't cooked in years because they were expensive and she couldn't justify the cost. Someone knew her heritage. Box 2. Baby supplies. But nestled among the diapers was a small photo album. Empty, meant to be filled. And a handwritten note on expensive cardstock. For Maya's memories. Every child deserves to have their story recorded. The handwriting was masculine, precise, elegant in a way that suggested old-world education. Lena's hands trembled as she set the note down. This wasn't charity anymore. This was personal. This was someone who knew her name, knew her daughter's name, knew her grandmother's recipes. This was someone who was watching her. Maya stirred against her chest, making small whimpering sounds. Lena automatically swayed, soothing her back to sleep, but her mind was racing through possibilities. Who? And more importantly, why? She'd learned early in life that nothing came free. Her ex-boyfriend had seemed generous too, at first. Paying for dinners, buying her gifts, insisting she didn't need to work so much. Then the generosity had become control. The gifts had become leverage. I bought you that coat, remember? I think you owe me. She'd escaped that relationship with nothing but Maya and her dignity intact. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Lena packed everything back into the boxes, with shaking hands. Not just these boxes, the formula and diapers from the first delivery too. Everything except what Maya had already consumed. She wasn't going to owe anyone anything. At 6:30 a.m., when the building started waking up, she carried all of it downstairs. The lobby had a small table near the mailboxes where residents sometimes left items to share. Lena arranged the boxes there carefully, making sure nothing would fall. Then she pulled out the notebook she always carried and wrote. To whoever is leaving supplies at apartment 4C, I appreciate the thought, but I cannot accept gifts from strangers. I don't know who you are or what you want, but I can't accept what I didn't earn. Please stop. If you want to help, donate to the Baker Street Family Shelter. They have people who need this more than I do. LP. She taped the note to the largest box where it couldn't be missed. Then she went back upstairs, fed Maya the last of the formula from her own money, and tried to sleep for 2 hours before her shift at the diner. But sleep wouldn't come. She kept thinking about the handwriting on that note, about someone knowing her grandmother's recipe, about the feeling of invisible eyes watching her struggle. Who are you? She thought. And what do you want from me? From the rooftop across the street, Soren read the note through the lobby window. He should have expected this. Should have realized that someone who refused free bread from a sympathetic cashier wouldn't accept anonymous supplies without question. Marcus's voice crackled through his phone. The business grant paperwork is ready. It'll show she applied 6 months ago, got approved last week. Completely legitimate paper trail.
She'll research it, Soren said.
She'll look for the catch. There isn't one. I built it perfectly. Small Business Development Fund, city-sponsored. She applied along with 200 other people. Won a lottery drawing. She doesn't remember applying. People apply for dozens of things when they're desperate. Memory gets fuzzy. Soren watched Lena's window. She was pacing. He could see her shadow moving back and forth. Maya in her arms, still trying to soothe, to comfort, to be everything her daughter needed despite having nothing herself. I cannot accept what I didn't earn. The words on that note burned in his mind. She wasn't just refusing charity. She was drawing a line, establishing a boundary, protecting herself the only way she knew how.
He understood it now.
The ex-boyfriend Marcus had found in his research. The pattern of control and manipulation Lena had escaped. She wasn't just proud, she was careful. She'd learned that generosity could be a trap. And here he was, anonymous and powerful, leaving gifts at her door like some twisted fairy tale. She thinks I'm dangerous. She's not wrong. Soren looked at his phone, at the business grant paperwork Marcus had created. Money with her name on it. Money she'd earned through a process she couldn't remember but could verify. It was manipulation, just more sophisticated than boxes at her door. But it was also the only way she'd accept help. Send the grant notification, Soren said. Official letterhead. Make sure it comes through proper channels. Already done. She'll get an email this morning and a physical letter this afternoon. Soren hung up and watched Lena's apartment for another hour, until the sun grew too bright and he had to retreat. She'd rejected his direct help. Fine. He'd help her indirectly. Through systems and paperwork and official channels that gave her the dignity of achievement rather than the shame of charity. She'd saved his life once. He'd spend however long it took to repay that debt in a way she could accept. Even if she never knew it was him. Even if she never knew someone was watching over her, ensuring that her pride didn't become her death sentence. But as he descended into the underground parking garage where his car waited, one thought troubled him. How long could he watch her struggle before his need to help became its own form of control? The email arrived at 9:17 a.m. while Lena was on her break at the dry cleaners. She almost deleted it as spam, City Small Business Development Fund, but something made her open it instead. Dear Ms. Petrov, congratulations. Your application for the Small Business Development Microgrant has been approved. Lena read it 3 times, her heart pounding. $5,000 for applicants demonstrating entrepreneurial potential despite financial hardship. Her application had been selected in a lottery from over 200 submissions. She didn't remember applying. But 6 months ago, she'd been 8 months pregnant, working 4 jobs, barely sleeping. She'd applied for so many assistance programs, grants, scholarships, desperate attempts to build something better before Maya arrived. Most she'd been rejected from. Some she'd never heard back from. Could she have applied and forgotten? Lena clicked the verification link. It led to an official city website, complete with government seals and contact information. She called the number listed, her hands shaking. City Development Fund, this is Maria speaking. I received an email about a grant. I just want to make sure it's legitimate. Of course. Can I have your name and confirmation number? Lena provided both, holding her breath. The sound of typing then. Yes, Ms. Petrov. Congratulations. Your application was very compelling. The selection committee was particularly moved by your essay about wanting to create opportunities for other single mothers in the food service industry. Essay. Thank you. When would I receive the funds? The check will be mailed within 5 business days. You can also opt for direct deposit if you'd like to provide your bank information. It was real. Completely, impossibly real. Lena finished the call in a daze, then immediately searched for the program online. Reviews from other recipients. News articles about the fund. Everything checked out. $5,000. Earned. Legitimate. Hers. She could buy formula for months, pay rent ahead, maybe even save some for emergencies. And it was official, not charity, not anonymous boxes, but something she'd apparently worked for and won. For the first time in months, Lena felt something other than exhaustion. She felt hope. The physical letter arrived that afternoon, along with a resource packet. Included was information about the Riverside Community Center, a nonprofit offering free childcare, job training, and a food pantry for working families. Grant recipients were automatically enrolled in their support network. Lena stared at the brochure. The community center was only 6 blocks from her apartment. How had she never noticed it? The next morning she went. The center was housed in a converted church, bright and welcoming despite its age. Inside, mothers with young children filled a common space. A childcare room buzzed with activity. The food pantry was organized like a small grocery store. Shop with dignity, the sign said. Take what you need. You must be Lena, a woman in her 50s approached, smiling warmly.
I'm Patricia.
I coordinate the grant recipients program. Welcome. I don't understand, Lena said. Why didn't I know about this place? We're small, and we don't advertise much. Most of our families find us through referrals or programs like the business development grant Patricia gestured around. But you're here now. That's what matters. She showed Lena the childcare room, licensed, free for working mothers, open from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. Then the pantry, stocked with fresh produce, meat, formula, diapers. Take what you need, Patricia said. You're working, you're trying. That's the only qualification. Lena felt tears threatening. I can really just take things. This isn't charity, honey. This is community. You take now, you give back when you can. That's how it works. For the first time since Maya was born, Lena filled a bag with groceries without calculating every penny. She selected fresh vegetables, real meat, a full container of formula, baby supplies. And it didn't feel like begging. It felt like belonging. From the coffee shop across the street, Soren watched Lena leave the community center. She was smiling, actually smiling. The tension that had carved itself into her shoulders had eased slightly. She walked differently, not quite lighter, but less like someone carrying the weight of imminent collapse. Marcus had done exceptional work. The community center was real, funded by a combination of city programs and private donations. Soren's money was buried so deep in the financial structure that no one could trace it to him. To Lena, it was simply a resource she'd earned access to through legitimate means. She bought it. Marcus's voice through his earpiece. She's using the center. Well done. The grant check will clear in 2 days. I set up the center's expansion funding last year, so everything flows naturally. Soren sipped his coffee. He could consume human food even if it provided no nourishment, and watched Lena stop at the park. She sat on a bench, took Maya out of the wrap, and just breathed, like someone who'd finally been given permission to rest. This is how you help her, he thought. Through systems. Through institutions. Through channels that give her dignity. Not through boxes at her door that felt like surveillance. Not through anonymous gifts that triggered her trauma. Through programs with names, with staff, with paperwork that proved she'd earned every bit of assistance she received. Keep monitoring the center's resources, Soren said. If they run low, replenish through the usual channels. Quietly. Understood. Though I have to say, this is the most elaborate way to help one human I've ever seen. She's not just one human. What is she then? Soren watched Lena kiss Maya's forehead, that same gesture of infinite love he'd first witnessed in the grocery store. She's proof that goodness still exists. That dignity matters more than survival to some people. That the world hasn't completely crushed every human worth saving. She's someone who deserves better, he said simply. He finished his coffee and left before Lena could sense his presence. He was getting better at helping her, learning to do it from a distance through proper channels, in ways that felt earned rather than given. But one problem remained, the vampire hunters he'd sensed prowling the city's edges 3 nights ago. They were getting closer, and they were looking for him, which meant, inevitably, they'd find Lena too. Anyone he showed interest in became a target. It was the oldest rule of his world. Vampires had no allies, only vulnerabilities. He thought he could help her without that becoming an issue. He'd been wrong. The hunter arrived on a Tuesday night, dressed like a tourist. Soren sensed him immediately. The holy water in his pack, the silver in his weapons, the particular scent of righteous purpose that all hunters carried. Different from police or criminals, hunters smelled like faith and fire. This one was young, mid-30s, athletic build, moving through the warehouse district with the careful awareness of someone trained to find monsters. Soren followed from the shadows, curiosity overriding caution. The hunter stopped at an abandoned church, one of Soren's old feeding grounds from years ago. He sprayed something on the door frame, whispered a prayer, and went inside. Soren watched from across the street, reading the hunter's body language. This wasn't reconnaissance. This was tracking. They knew he was here. In this city. Active. The question was, what had made them come now? Soren had been careful for decades. He fed only on the guilty. Left no bodies. Maintained perfect cover as a wealthy recluse. The local vampire community was small, disciplined, invisible. So why hunters? Why now? He pulled out his phone and called Marcus. We have a problem. The hunter? I know. There are 3 of them. They checked into a motel downtown yesterday. Why didn't you tell me? Because you've been distracted. Marcus's tone carried disapproval. Playing guardian angel to a human while professionals trained to kill you set up shop in your territory. Soren's jaw tightened. Have they located my residences? Not yet. But they're asking questions. Showing photos of victims from other cities. Vampires who fed messily. They think there's a nest here. There isn't. I know that. You know that. But 2 months ago, a young vampire passed through and killed 3 people before you stopped him. The hunters found that trail. Soren remembered. A fledgling, barely 50 years old, with no control and no sense. Soren had eliminated him personally, but not before the damage was done. They'll find nothing, Soren said. I cleaned up completely. They'll find patterns. That's what hunters do. They track feeding grounds, witness accounts, medical examiner reports. And right now, they're very interested in the west side. Lena's neighborhood. Soren's blood went cold, or colder than usual. Why the west side? Because you've been there. A lot. Witnesses report seeing a tall man in dark clothes on rooftops. Always watching one building. Always at night. Stupid. Careless. He'd been so focused on watching over Lena that he hadn't considered how obvious his presence might be to anyone looking for supernatural activity. I'll relocate, Soren said. Too late. They're already mapping your patterns. And there's something else, Marcus paused. They're not just tracking vampires. They're identifying targets, humans you might have formed attachments to, people you'd protect. They're looking for leverage. Exactly. And if they're watching you watch that apartment building, they'd identify Lena as someone he cared about, which would make her a target. Not to kill, hunters rarely harmed innocents, but to use. To draw him out. To create a confrontation on their terms. Soren looked toward the west side of the city, where Lena was probably sleeping between shifts, Maya in the crib beside her bed. How long do we have? Days, maybe. They're thorough. They'll research before they act. Can you misdirect them? I can try. But Soren. Marcus's voice turned serious. You need to decide what matters more. Your safety or hers. Because if they figure out she means something to you, they'll use that. And if you protect her, you reveal yourself. It wasn't a difficult choice. Protect her, Soren said. I don't care what it costs. He hung up and moved through the city with renewed purpose. He needed to see the hunters himself, understand what he was dealing with. The motel was cheap and anonymous, exactly what experienced hunters would choose. Soren climbed to the roof of the building across the street and watched their window. 3 of them, like Marcus had said. The young one from the church. An older woman with scars on her hands, veteran hunter, probably in charge, and a thin man who never stopped moving, constantly checking weapons and equipment. They had a wall covered in photos and maps. Soren couldn't see details, but he recognized the pattern of a hunter's kill board. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Vampire King. We know you're watching. We're not here for you. We're here for the nest. Help us find them, and we leave. Refuse, and we hunt everything that moves in darkness, including your little charity project on Morrison Street. Morrison Street. Lena's address. Soren stared at the message, rage building in his chest. These hunters knew. Somehow, they'd already identified her as significant, which meant they'd been watching longer than Marcus realized. His phone buzzed again. Tomorrow night. Abandoned factory on River Road.
Come alone. Let's talk.
Or we start asking questions about the single mother in 4C who never sleeps. It was a trap. Obviously. Hunters didn't negotiate. They eliminated threats. But they also wouldn't harm Lena if he cooperated. Hunters had rules, codes, ethics that separated them from simple murderers. Unless these hunters were different. Soren texted back, "Touch her and there won't be enough of you left to bury." The response came immediately. "We don't hurt innocents, but we will use them. Your choice, vampire. Help us or watch her become bait." Soren pocketed his phone and looked back toward the west side. He'd survived 3 centuries by being smart, careful, invisible, by never forming attachments that could be exploited, by treating humans as resources rather than responsibilities. And then a woman had refused to beg for baby formula, and somehow that had undone 300 years of careful isolation. He'd made himself vulnerable. And now someone he'd tried to protect was in danger because of it. Marcus was right. He needed to choose. Disappear and let the hunters chase shadows while Lena remained safe in anonymity, or engage and risk everything. But there was a third option. End the hunters before they could use her. It wasn't the moral choice. It wasn't the choice the young man he'd been 3 centuries ago would have made. But that young man had died in poverty while trying to save people who refused to save themselves. Soren wasn't going to let history repeat itself. Not this time. Not with her. Lena knew someone was following her. She'd noticed the woman 3 days ago, 50s, dressed too practically for the neighborhood, watching from a parked car. Then yesterday, a different man, thin and nervous, pretending to read a newspaper at the bus stop. They weren't even trying to be subtle. At first, Lena thought it was social services. Maybe someone had reported her, the tired single mother who brought her baby to work, who looked like she was barely surviving. But social services didn't work in pairs.
Didn't watch at night.
Didn't have the particular energy of people hunting something. And then there was the other presence. She couldn't see him, but she felt it, that same sensation she'd had for weeks now. Someone watching from the shadows. Someone who appeared after the boxes had stopped, after she'd started using the community center. Someone who felt familiar in a way that made her skin prickle. Lena had learned to trust her instincts. They'd kept her alive when her ex turned violent. They'd told her to leave before things got worse. They'd guided her through the hardest months of her life. And right now, her instincts were screaming that she was in the middle of something dangerous. So she did something stupid. She set a trap. Thursday evening, Lena told Patricia at the community center that she had a late shift. She left Maya there, the first time she'd ever left her daughter overnight, and it physically hurt, and headed to the bus stop on Morrison and 5th. The dangerous bus stop. The one where muggings happened. The one everyone avoided after dark. She sat on the bench and waited. The woman appeared first, across the street, pretending to window shop. Then the thin man, 30 yards down the block. They were positioned to watch all approaches to the bus stop. They're not watching me, Lena realized. They're watching for whoever's been watching me. The thought should have been frightening. Instead, it crystallized something she'd been feeling for weeks. Whoever had been leaving those boxes, whoever had created that grant, whoever had been protecting her from the shadows, they were in danger now. Because of her.
I'm bait.
Lena pulled out her phone. opened a new note, and typed, "I know you're there. I know someone's watching. The people following me aren't after me, they're after you. Don't come tonight. Please."
She didn't know who she was writing to.
Didn't know if they could even see it. But she angled her phone screen toward the darkness and held it there for 30 seconds before putting it away. Then she waited. 20 minutes passed. The bus came and went. Lena stayed seated. The woman across the street shifted, checking her watch. The thin man was getting impatient. Then Lena felt it, a change in the air pressure, like before a storm. The streetlight above her flickered. Someone was coming, but not from where the hunters expected. A voice spoke from directly behind her, so close she should have heard him approach. "You should have gone home." Lena turned slowly. The man from the diner. The one who'd asked about culinary school. Except he looked different now, sharper, more dangerous, like he'd stopped pretending to be harmless. And his eyes, even in the darkness, seemed to catch light that wasn't there. "You're him," Lena whispered. "You're the one who's been helping me. And you're the woman who saved my life 7 years ago." He moved around the bench with fluid grace, positioning himself between Lena and the hunters. "You should leave.
Now."
"They'll follow me. Then they won't be focused on me." Lena studied his face. There was something unnatural about his stillness, the way he didn't seem to breathe. "What are you?" "Something you should be afraid of." His voice was gentle despite the words. "Please, Lena. Go. You know my name. I know everything about you. I've been watching you for weeks. I'm exactly what those hunters think I am." He gestured toward the woman and the thin man, who were now moving closer, flanking. "And if you don't leave, you'll be caught in the middle of something very ugly." Lena should have run. Every survival instinct, she had screamed at her to grab Maya and disappear. But this man, this thing, had spent weeks protecting her. Had found ways to help her that preserved her dignity. Had never asked for anything in return.
"The boxes," she said.
"The grant. The community center. That was all you. I owed you a debt. For what? You stopped to help a stranger bleeding in an alley when you were 17. You used your scarf to stop the bleeding. You got hurt doing it." He glanced at her wrist, at the scar. "You never asked who I was or what happened. You just helped." The memory crashed over her. Rain, an alley. A man who'd seemed close to death, but whose wound had somehow stopped bleeding while she talked to him. She'd thought it was adrenaline, shock playing tricks on her memory. "You compelled me," Lena said, the pieces fitting together. "Made me forget. For your safety. And mine. But you didn't forget me." Something flickered across his face. Pain. Regret. Something ancient and complicated. "Someone made me forget. For 7 years. Until I saw you in that grocery store, refusing to beg." The woman hunter called out from across the street. "Soren. We know you're there. Step into the light. This doesn't have to end badly."
Soren.
Lena tested the name in her mind. It fit him. Old. Formal. Dangerous. "They're going to use me against you," Lena said. "I know. So, why are you here?" Soren finally looked at her directly, and Lena saw his eyes fully, red-tinged, inhuman, but somehow still holding warmth. "Because 7 years ago, you stayed in the rain with a stranger and talked to him about your grandmother's recipes until he was strong enough to survive. Because you refused charity with more grace than I've seen in 3 centuries. Because you deserve better than to become a casualty in a war you didn't start." 3 centuries, Lena repeated faintly. "I'm a vampire. Those are hunters. And in about 30 seconds, this is going to become very violent. So please."
"No."
Soren blinked.
"No."
"I'm not leaving." Lena stood up, legs shaking but voice steady.
"You protected me.
Now I'm protecting you. You can't. I'm human. They won't hurt me." She stepped in front of him, facing the approaching hunters. "And they can't use me as bait if I choose your side." For the first time since she'd met him, Soren looked completely bewildered. "You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." Lena raised her voice toward the hunters. "Whatever you want with him, you go through me first." The woman hunter stopped 10 feet away, hand on something under her jacket. Ma'am, you don't understand. That thing behind you is a predator. It's dangerous. He's been protecting me for weeks. Never asked for anything. Never hurt anyone. Can you say the same? The woman's expression hardened. We're trying to save you. I don't need saving. Not from him. The standoff stretched, tense and fragile. Then Soren laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. You magnificent, foolish human. And everything went to hell. The thin hunter moved first. He pulled a crossbow from under his coat, silver bolt already loaded, aimed directly at Soren's chest. But before he could fire, Soren moved. One moment he was behind Lena. The next, he was across the street, the crossbow shattered in pieces on the ground, the thin hunter stumbling backward with wide, terrified eyes. Don't, Soren said quietly. I'm trying very hard not to hurt you. The woman hunter drew a gun, not regular bullets, Lena realized with growing horror. Something worse. Step away from Marcus. Marcus should step away from me. Soren's voice remained calm, but Lena could see the tension in his shoulders. I haven't killed anyone in this city who didn't deserve it. You have no cause to hunt me. You're a vampire. The woman's aim didn't waver. That's cause enough. Elena. Wait. The young hunter from the church appeared from the shadows, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Look at him. He's not attacking. He's protecting her. Elena's jaw tightened. Vampires don't protect humans, David. They manipulate them. I'm standing right here, Lena interjected, stepping off the curb. And I'm not manipulated. I'm choosing to help him. You don't understand what he is. He's someone who saved my life. Lena moved closer to Soren, her heart hammering but her voice steady. When I had nothing, when I was about to lose everything, he helped me. Not because he wanted something from me, because I helped him once, and he remembered. Vampires don't have gratitude. Then maybe you don't know vampires as well as you think you do. Lena turned to Soren. Tell them why you helped me. Soren's expression was unreadable. Lena, this won't. Tell them about the alley, about the rain, about how a 17-year-old girl stopped to help a stranger who was dying. Something shifted in Elena's stance, not quite belief, but curiosity. Soren sighed, a very human gesture. 7 years ago, I was attacked by hunters. Different hunters, different city. They used blessed silver and holy water. I barely escaped, bleeding and weak. I collapsed in an alley during a rainstorm. He glanced at Lena. She found me. She was just a teenager, working late, and she stopped to help. She pressed her scarf to my wound, talked to me to keep me conscious, stayed with me in the freezing rain until I was strong enough to stand. And then you fed on her. Marcus spat. No, Soren's voice turned sharp. I compelled her to forget and walked away. Then I arranged a culinary scholarship in her name, anonymous, legitimate, something she earned. Because she deserved better than the life she had. The scholarship never reached me, Lena said softly. My grandmother got sick. I had to stay with her. I know. I found out too late. Soren's eyes held genuine regret. By the time I saw you again in a grocery store, putting back baby formula because you had no money, I'd forgotten you entirely. Someone had made me forget. David lowered his weapon slightly. Someone compelled you to forget a human you'd helped.
Yes.
Which means someone powerful wanted that connection severed. Soren looked at the hunters. I don't know who or why, but when I saw her again, when I remembered what she'd done for me, I tried to help. Anonymously at first. Then through legitimate channels. I never fed on her. Never threatened her. Never asked for anything. Vampires don't. Elena started. Don't what? Soren's voice rose with frustration. Don't feel gratitude? Don't remember kindness? Don't get lonely after 3 centuries of watching everyone they love turn to dust. He took a breath, forced himself calm. I'm not claiming to be good.
I faon humans.
I kill when necessary. But I'm not the monster you're hunting. I maintain order in this territory. I prevent fledglings from causing massacres. I keep the chaos contained. And we're supposed to just trust you? Elena's gun remained steady. No, Soren's expression hardened. You're supposed to be smart enough to recognize that killing me would create a power vacuum that invites every uncontrolled vampire in 3 states to descend on the city. You're supposed to understand that I'm the reason your job has been easy here. The standoff stretched, 3 hunters and 1 vampire facing each other in the flickering streetlight. Then Lena did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She stepped directly in front of Soren, between him and Elena's gun. You said you don't hurt innocents, Lena said to Elena. Prove it. Lower your weapon and listen to what he's saying.
Or shoot through me to get to him.
Your choice. Lena, what are you? Soren started. Shut up, she didn't take her eyes off Elena. I spent weeks watching people treat me like I was helpless. Like I couldn't make my own choices about what helped to accept. Like my dignity didn't matter because I was poor, her voice strengthened. He was the only one who understood. The only one who helped without making me feel like a charity case. So yes, he's a vampire. Yes, he's dangerous. But he's also the reason my daughter has formula, and I have hope. And I won't let you kill him for that. Marcus had retrieved his crossbow, or another one. She's compelled. Has to be. I'm not compelled, Lena's laugh was bitter. I wish I was. This would be easier if I didn't have a choice. But I do. And I'm choosing to believe that someone who spent weeks protecting a stranger without asking for anything in return deserves at least a conversation before you murder him. David spoke up. Elena, what if she's right? What if we've been so focused on hunting vampires that we've stopped asking whether we should? Don't be naive. I'm not. But look at him. David gestured to Soren. He could have killed all of us in the time we've been talking.
Could have disappeared.
Could have used her as a hostage. He's doing none of those things. Elena's gun lowered an inch. Just an inch. But it was something. Why? She asked Soren. Why do you care what happens to one human woman? Soren was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than Lena had heard before, because she reminded me what it was like to be human. To have nothing except your dignity. To choose kindness when cruelty would be easier, he paused. Because in 300 years, I'd forgotten that such people still existed. And now,
Elena said.
Now I remember why being human mattered. Why it still matters, Soren looked at Lena. Why she matters. The words hung in the cold night air. Finally, Elena holstered her weapon. We'll be watching you, vampire. One step out of line. You'll find me easier than most to kill, Soren finished. I know. Marcus looked mutinous, but followed Elena's lead. David nodded to Lena, respect in his eyes. As the hunters retreated into the darkness, Lena turned to Soren. Are you the man I saved? She asked. The question she'd held for weeks. Yes. And you're a vampire. Yes. And you've been watching over me for weeks. Yes. Lena considered this. I should be terrified. You should. But I'm not, she met his inhuman eyes. Why aren't I afraid of you? Soren smiled sadly. Because you've survived worse than me. And because you have excellent instincts about who deserves your trust.
Do you?
Deserve it. No, he said honestly. But I'm trying to. Soren took Lena to a place she'd never expected. A coffee shop. Not his penthouse. Not some shadowy lair. A 24-hour diner 2 blocks from the community center, fluorescent lit and ordinary, filled with night shift workers and insomniacs. Coffee? He asked, like they were on a normal date instead of a vampire and a human processing the fact that fairy tales were real. Tea, Lena said faintly. With milk. Please. He ordered. Tea for her, black coffee he wouldn't drink for himself, and they sat in a corner booth. Lena's hands shook as she wrapped them around the warm mug. Ask, Soren said. Whatever you need to know. How old are you? 347 years. Give or take a decade. Time gets fuzzy. Do you kill people? Yes, his honesty was brutal. But only those who've earned it. Murderers. Rapists. People who prey on the vulnerable. I feed on guilt. That's not how vampires work in movies. Movies get a lot wrong. We can go out in sunlight, it's just painful and weakening. We can eat human food. It just doesn't sustain us. Crosses and garlic do nothing, he paused. Holy water and blessed silver, though? Those hurt. Lena thought about the scar on his wrist. The hunters 7 years ago. They almost killed you. They should have. Would have if you hadn't stopped. Why did someone make you forget me? I don't know yet. But I will find out. His jaw tightened. Someone powerful enough to compel a vampire king wanted that memory erased. Which means you were either in danger from me, or I was in danger from caring about you. Vampire king. Soren looked almost embarrassed. I ruled covens. Territories. It's a political structure. I gave it up 50 years ago. Too much responsibility. Not enough freedom. But you're still powerful. Yes. Lena sipped her tea, processing. The grant. The community center. All of that was you. I provided funding, but the institutions are real. The center helps dozens of families. Your grant was legitimate. You just didn't remember applying, because I made sure the application happened during a period when you were overwhelmed enough that forgetting was plausible. You manipulated me. Yes, he didn't flinch from it. I manipulated you because you wouldn't accept direct help. Because your pride, your beautiful, frustrating pride, would have let you starve rather than take what felt like charity. So you lied instead. I gave you dignity instead. His voice was quiet. The outcome was the same, you got help. But one way, you would have felt shame. The other way, you felt accomplished. I chose the path that let you keep your self-respect. Lena wanted to be angry. Should have been angry. But she thought about the relief she'd felt receiving that grant letter. The pride. The sense that maybe she wasn't completely failing at life. You're a manipulative monster, she said. Yes. Who saved my life and my daughter's life. Yes. This is very confusing. Soren's smile was sad. Welcome to moral ambiguity. It's where most of us actually live. Lena set down her tea. Why did you tell me the truth? You could have let those hunters scare me away. Let me think you were just a generous stranger. I would have been safer not knowing. Because you stepped in front of a gun for me, Soren's expression turned serious. Because you chose my side without knowing what I was. Because you deserved honesty after that kind of courage. Stupidity, you mean?
No.
Courage, he leaned forward. Lena, I've lived for 3 centuries. I've seen bravery in 1,000 forms. And what you did tonight, standing between a vampire and hunters who wanted to kill him, that was one of the bravest things I've ever witnessed. I just didn't want you to get hurt. After everything you did for me.
Exactly.
You risked your life for someone who'd helped you. Just like you did 7 years ago in that alley, his voice softened. You have a pattern of saving monsters, Lena Petrov. You're not a monster. I drink human blood to survive. From people who deserve it, you said. That's not the same thing, she met his eyes. A monster wouldn't have spent weeks watching me struggle just to figure out how to help without hurting my pride. A monster wouldn't have cared. Maybe I'm just a monster with good strategic planning. Maybe you're just a man who lived too long and forgot how to accept that he's capable of kindness. The words hit Soren like a physical blow. He sat back, something flickering across his ancient face. Recognition, pain, hope. You remind me of someone, he said finally.
Who?
My mother. She died rather than accept stolen food. Died proud and starving because her dignity mattered more than survival. His hands clenched on the table. I've spent 300 years angry at her for that choice. Angry that she wouldn't just take what she needed to live. But, Lena prompted. But watching you, I finally understood. It wasn't about the food. It was about who she'd have to become to accept it. What she'd have to give up of herself. He looked at Lena with ancient eyes that had seen too much. She taught me that how you survive matters as much as whether you survive. I forgot that lesson until I saw you put back baby formula rather than beg. Lena's throat tightened. I'm sorry about your mother. I'm sorry I couldn't save her. And I'm sorry I've been trying to save you, like I couldn't save her. That's not fair to you. No, Lena agreed. But I understand it. They sat in silence for a moment, 2 people from different worlds connected by the simple act of witnessing each other's pain. What happens now? Lena asked finally.
Now?
I stop watching from the shadows. I stop manipulating your life from a distance. Soren's expression turned determined. Now, I ask, do you want my help? Honestly? With full knowledge of what I am. And if I say no, then I disappear.
Completely.
The grant is yours. That's legitimate. The community center remains funded. You'll never see me again. And if I say yes, then we figure out what help looks like between a vampire and a human. Honestly, no more secrets. No more manipulation.
Just.
Whatever this is. Lena thought about Maya sleeping safely at the community center. Thought about the weeks of anonymous help that had kept them alive. Thought about the man in front of her who'd lived for centuries, but still remembered kindness. I have conditions, she said. Of course you do. No more manipulation. No more arranging things behind my back. If you want to help, you ask first. Agreed. And you teach me about your world. If I'm going to be involved with a vampire, I need to know what that means. The dangers. The rules. All of it. Agreed. And, she hesitated. You let me help you too. Whatever you need. Because this isn't just you saving me. This is something else. Something equal. Soren looked stunned. You want to help me? You've been alone for centuries, haven't you? Watching humanity from the outside. That's its own kind of starvation. Lena reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. Maybe we both need saving. Soren stared at her offered hand, this fragile human offering friendship to a creature who could kill her without effort. Then, slowly, he took it. His skin was cool but not cold. Solid.
Real.
I don't deserve this, he said quietly. Neither did I deserve your help. But you gave it anyway. Lena squeezed his hand. Maybe that's what kindness is. Giving people what they need, not what they've earned. For the first time in 300 years, Soren felt something he'd thought long dead.
Hope.
6 weeks later, Lena graduated from the community center's culinary training program. It wasn't culinary school, not the prestigious program she'd once dreamed of, but it was real training with real certification. Job placement assistance. A path forward. Soren sat in the back row of the small ceremony, wearing sunglasses despite the indoor setting, watching her accept her certificate with Maya on her hip. He'd learned something important in the past 6 weeks. Helping someone didn't mean controlling their journey. It meant walking beside them while they found their own path. Lena had insisted on doing the program herself. No magical grants this time. No mysterious job offers. Just her own effort, her own time, her own achievement. Soren had helped only when asked, providing childcare through the center when her schedule was impossible, occasionally bringing groceries when he happened to be in the neighborhood, being available when she needed someone to talk to. It was harder than manipulating from the shadows. But it felt right in a way 3 centuries of control never had. You came, Lena said after the ceremony, Maya reaching for the shiny buttons on his coat. I was invited. He let Maya grab his finger, marveling at how something so small and fragile could grip so tightly. How does it feel? Like I earned it. Her smile was radiant, the exhaustion of weeks ago replaced by something stronger. Like I'm building something real. You are. They walked together through the evening streets, vampire, human, and infant, an unlikely trio that somehow worked. Soren kept to the shadows out of habit, but Lena walked in the light, unafraid. The west side looked different now. The community center had expanded, serving twice as many families. The building where Lena lived had undergone repairs, legitimate city improvements that Soren may have expedited through proper channels. Streetlights had been replaced. A small park renovated. Not because Soren had ruled it from shadows. Because the community had organized, applied for grants, demanded better from their city council. Soren had simply made sure the right people heard them. I got a job offer, Lena said as they walked. Where? The new restaurant downtown.
Sous-chef position.
Real salary. Benefits, she paused. It's owned by someone named Marcus Valeru. Do you know him? Soren smiled. His business manager had exceeded expectations. I might have heard the name. He said something interesting during my interview. Said the owner specifically wanted to hire people who'd demonstrated resilience and dignity despite hardship. Lena gave him a knowing look. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? The restaurant is legitimate. The owner makes his own hiring decisions. But you suggested me. I mentioned that a talented chef was looking for opportunities. What he did with that information was his choice. Lena shook her head, but she was smiling. You're still manipulating things. I'm using my resources to create opportunities. You still have to earn the position. He interviewed 6 other candidates, and I was the best. You were the only one who asked about the restaurant's policy on hiring single mothers and providing childcare assistance. Soren's expression turned proud. You negotiated for other people before yourself. That's what got you the job. They reached Lena's building. She'd been saving for a new apartment, somewhere safer, but had decided to stay. My neighbors need me here, she'd said. Mrs. Chun, the Rodriguez family, their community. I don't abandon community. So Soren had quietly improved the building instead. Helped the landlord with financing for necessary repairs. Made sure the structure was sound, the heating worked, the locks were secure. Not controlling. Just
Caring.
Will you come up? Lena asked. I made sarmale. From my grandmother's recipe. The one from the boxes I left. The one you remembered because you compelled me to tell you about it 7 years ago while I kept you conscious, she grinned.
See?
I'm learning how your manipulative vampire brain works. Should I be concerned? Terrified. Now come eat. You can pretend to enjoy human food while I tell you about the new chef I'm training with. Soren followed her up the 4 flights of stairs, listening to her excited chatter about techniques and flavors and the future she was building. Maya had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder, peaceful and secure. The apartment was still small, still worn, but it felt different now.
Lived in. Loved. Safe.
Lena served the sarmale, cabbage rolls that smelled exactly like memory, and talked about her plans. She wanted to eventually open her own small restaurant. Nothing fancy, she said. Just good food, affordable prices, a place where working families can eat with dignity. You'll do it, Soren said with certainty. How do you know? Because I've watched you refuse to give up for weeks. Because you turned down charity, but accepted community. Because you stood in front of hunters for vampire you barely knew, he smiled. If you can do all that, you can do anything. They ate together as the city darkened outside the window, the vampire who'd forgotten how to be human and the human who'd reminded him it mattered. Soren had spent 3 centuries ruling through power and fear and control. He'd built empires in shadow, commanded loyalty through force, survived by keeping everyone at a careful distance. And then a woman had put back baby formula rather than beg, and somehow that had undone everything he'd thought he understood about strength. True power, he'd learned, wasn't controlling people. It was choosing to protect them while letting them remain free. As he left that night, retreating to his penthouse across the city, Soren looked back at the small window where a light still burned. Where a single mother worked late on plans for a future she was building with her own hands. He'd moved his primary residence closer to the west side. Not to watch Lena specifically, but to be present in a way he hadn't been in centuries. Available.
Involved.
The vampire community had noticed. Word was spreading about the king who'd given up isolation for connection, who protected humans without ruling them, who'd chosen purpose over power. Some thought he'd gone soft. Dangerous. They were right on both counts. But Soren had spent 300 years being hard, being safe, being alone. He'd survived every threat, accumulated every advantage, maintained perfect control. And he'd been miserable. Now, protecting one stubborn human and her daughter, helping a community rebuild itself, being part of something larger than his own existence. Now he felt something he hadn't felt since his human life ended.
Alive.
His phone buzzed. A text from Lena. Thank you. For everything. But mostly for letting me do it myself. Soren smiled and typed back. Thank you for reminding me why it matters. Then he looked out over the city he'd haunted for decades, no longer as a king in shadows, but as a guardian who finally understood what he was guarding. Not territory, not power, not control.
Hope.
The kind a tired mother carried when she refused to beg. The kind that survived in small acts of kindness between strangers. The kind that said even monsters could learn to be something better, if they had the right teacher. And Soren had learned from the best, a woman who'd saved his life twice without even trying. Once with her scarf in the rain, once with her dignity in a grocery store. She'd asked what he wanted in return for his help. He'd told her the truth. Just don't lose what makes you who you are. She hadn't. And in protecting that, he'd found what made him who he could become. Not the lonely vampire king who ruled from darkness, but someone who chose every night to guard those who never begged, because they deserved to be protected. And because protecting them made him remember why 300 years ago, a desperate young man had chosen immortality, not to survive forever alone, but to ensure the things worth protecting could endure. Things like dignity, like compassion, like the fierce, beautiful stubbornness of humans who refused to surrender what made them human. Soren disappeared into the night, no longer lonely, no longer just surviving. Finally, after 3 centuries of existence, actually living.